In the spring of 1999, inside a bustling toy store in Hong Kong, a young girl pointed at a large, plush Hello Kitty doll sitting on the shelf. To the rest of the world, this iconic cartoon character represented innocence, joy, and childhood comfort. But just a few miles away, inside a cramped, dilapidated apartment on Granville Road, that exact same smiling doll was being used to conceal one of the most grotesque secrets in modern criminal history. Investigators would later state that what lay hidden inside the synthetic stuffing of that plush toy defied human comprehension. It was a discovery so profoundly disturbing that it would traumatize seasoned homicide detectives for the rest of their lives. But the horror did not begin with the doll itself. It began months earlier, with a desperate young woman, a massive financial debt, and a ruthless triad gang that refused to be slighted.
Fan Man Yi was a 23-year-old nightclub hostess trying to survive in the neon-lit underbelly of Hong Kong. Bright, charismatic, and fiercely independent, she worked tirelessly to support her young son. But the crushing weight of poverty eventually forced her into a dark corner. In a moment of desperation, she borrowed a sum of money from a local triad enforcer named Chan Man Lok. It was a decision that sealed her fate. By early 1999, the interest on the loan had ballooned to an astronomical sum she could never hope to repay. Believing she could escape the shadow of the gang, Fan allegedly stole a wallet containing additional funds, hoping to buy herself some time. She did not realize that Chan Man Lok was not a man to be crossed, and he had already ordered his loyal underlings to hunt her down at any cost.
The trap snapped shut on a chilly afternoon in March. Fan Man Yi was walking down a crowded street, surrounded by hundreds of oblivious pedestrians, when three men stepped out of the shadows. Before she could scream, she was violently shoved into the back of a waiting vehicle. The car sped away, blending seamlessly into the dense Hong Kong traffic. Her captors drove her straight to a chaotic, filthy apartment located at number 31 Granville Road. The building was old, its walls damp, and the constant roar of the city outside perfectly masked the horrors that were about to unfold within. Fan was pushed into a dimly lit room where Chan Man Lok sat waiting for her. She begged for mercy, offering to pay back every cent she owed. But the cold glint in Chan's eyes revealed a terrifying truth. This was no longer about the money. As the door to the Granville Road apartment locked from the inside, Fan Man Yi's world shrunk to the confines of a living nightmare. Chan and his two accomplices, Liang Xingqiu and Liang Weilun, had no intention of letting her go. They wanted to make an example of her, to send a brutal message to anyone else who dared to disrespect their criminal enterprise. They bound her hands and feet, stripping away her dignity, before unleashing a campaign of psychological and physical terror that would last for over a month. Neighbors would later recall hearing strange, muffled thuds and low, agonizing groans echoing through the building's ventilation shafts during the dead of night. Yet, assuming it was just a typical domestic dispute, nobody called the police. They had no idea that a young mother's life was systematically being extinguished right above their heads. The apartment at number 31 Granville Road quickly transformed into a laboratory of pure malice. For the first few days, Chan Man Lok and his accomplices kept Fan Man Yi bound to a chair, deprived of food and water, using sheer psychological terror to break her spirit. But as the triad members consumed heavy doses of methamphetamine, their sadism escalated into unprecedented brutality. They beat her daily with iron pipes, laughing as she wept and pleaded for her life. The neighborhood outside remained loud and indifferent, oblivious to the fact that a human being was being systematically dismantled just a few feet away. Fan's body was rapidly giving out under the relentless assault. Yet her captors were only getting started, engineering new, twisted ways to inflict agony.
As the weeks dragged on, the torture grew increasingly inventive and bizarre. The men began using boiling water, pouring it directly over Fan's skin, causing severe burns that they maliciously refused to treat. To ensure she couldn't cry out loud enough to alert the tenants next door, they forced her to ingest various toxic substances, burning her throat and muffling her screams into low, guttural whimpers. They treated her not as a human being who owed a debt, but as an object for their drug-fueled amusement. Even more chillingly, they would occasionally force her to smile and laugh through her tears, mocking her pain in a sick display of absolute psychological dominance. Fan was trapped in a living hell, and the exit grew darker by the hour. By mid-April, Fan Man-Yi's physical state was critical. She could no longer stand on her own, her vision was fading, and her internal organs were beginning to shut down from the constant trauma and severe malnutrition. Yet, whenever she drifted into unconsciousness, her captors would violently wake her up, refusing to let her escape into the peace of oblivion. They chained her inside a cramped, suffocating wardrobe for hours on end, leaving her alone in total, terrifying darkness. The air inside the apartment grew heavy and foul, laced with the smell of chemicals, sweat, and impending death. It was clear to everyone in that room that Fan would never leave Granville Road alive, and the men began plotting exactly what they would do once her heart finally stopped beating. In the final week of April 1999, the agonizing ordeal came to a sudden, silent end. One afternoon, after another brutal round of assault, the captors noticed that Fan had gone completely still on the floor. When they checked her pulse, they realized she was gone. She had succumbed to her horrific injuries, dying alone on the cold apartment floor. Instead of panic, a chilling calmness washed over the three killers. They had a lifeless body in the middle of a dense metropolis, and they needed a way to destroy the evidence before anyone noticed she was missing. They dragged her remains into the bathroom and retrieved a hacksaw, embarking on a gruesome cover-up that would eventually lead them to the smiling face of a childhood toy. The bathroom of the Granville Road apartment became a scene of absolute depravity as the three triad members began dismantling the evidence of their crime. To prevent the foul odors of decay from alerting the tenants in the building, they placed Fan Man-Yi's remains into large cooking pots, boiling them on the kitchen stove for hours. The thick, sickening scent of cooked flesh and heavy spices drifted out of the apartment windows, blending into the ambient smells of the bustling Hong Kong street market below. Passers-by went about their day, completely unaware of the macabre culinary process taking place just stories above them. The killers worked with a cold, mechanical precision, completely detached from the humanity of the woman they had just destroyed, focused only on making her vanish forever. Once the remains were processed, the men faced the difficult challenge of disposing of the most identifiable part of Fan's body, her skull. They knew that if the police ever uncovered a skeleton, dental records would instantly link them to the missing nightclub hostess. In a bizarre and deeply unsettling stroke of twisted inspiration, Chan Man Lok looked around the messy apartment and spotted a large, plush, mermaid-themed Hello Kitty doll. Utilizing a sharp knife, he sliced open the back of the cartoon character's head, discarding a handful of the soft synthetic stuffing. He then forced Fan's skull deep inside the fabric cavity, sewing the fabric back together with a coarse thread. The icon of childhood innocence had officially been transformed into a macabre, hidden tomb.
The rest of Fan's remains were packed into multiple heavy black plastic garbage bags. In the dead of night, the men carried the bags down the dark stairwell of number 31 Granville Road, tossing them carelessly into the communal dumpster out front. over the next few days, municipal garbage trucks arrived, collecting the waste and burying it deep within Hong Kong's vast public landfills, ensuring that large portions of the evidence would never be recovered by human hands. The plush Hello Kitty doll, however, remained inside the apartment, sitting quietly on a worn-out sofa. Its wide plastic eyes stared blankly at the empty room, guarding a horrific secret, while the killers locked the front door and scattered across the city, confident they had committed the perfect, untraceable crime.
Weeks passed, and the intense stench inside the abandoned apartment began to leak through the door frames, prompting complaints from the neighbors. Yet the true breakthrough in the case did not come from the police or the landlord. It came from a young, guilt-ridden teenager. A 14-year-old girl who was the girlfriend of one of the accomplices had witnessed portions of the torture and could no longer sleep at night. She was haunted by vivid, terrifying nightmares of a faceless woman stalking her in the dark. Driven to the brink of insanity by her own conscience, she walked into a local police station in May 1999, claiming she knew about a murder. The detectives were highly skeptical, but they decided to dispatch a routine patrol to investigate the Granville Road address anyway. When the detectives stepped into the apartment at No. 31 Granville Road, they were hit by a wave of foul, humid air that smelled heavily of decomposition and cheap air freshener. The rooms were completely ransacked, littered with discarded clothing, drug paraphernalia, and leftover trash. As they moved deeper into the dark living space, their flashlights illuminated a large, plush Hello Kitty doll sitting prominently on a worn-out couch. The doll's cheerful, smiling face stood in jarring, grotesque contrast to the absolute filth of the crime scene. One of the officers noticed that the toy felt strangely heavy and lopsided. Peering closer, he saw crude, thick stitching along the back of its head. Using a pocket knife, he sliced the thread open, revealing human hair and a severely charred skull staring back from the cotton stuffing. When the detectives stepped into the apartment at No. 31 Granville Road, they were hit by a wave of foul, humid air that smelled heavily of decomposition and cheap air freshener. The rooms were completely ransacked, littered with discarded clothing, drug paraphernalia, and leftover trash. As they moved deeper into the dark living space, their flashlights illuminated a large, plush Hello Kitty doll sitting prominently on a worn-out couch. The doll's cheerful, smiling face stood in jarring, grotesque contrast to the absolute filth of the crime scene. One of the officers noticed that the toy felt strangely heavy and lopsided. Peering closer, he saw crude, thick stitching along the back of its head. Using a pocket knife, he sliced the thread open, revealing human hair and a severely charred skull staring back from the cotton stuffing.
The legal proceedings concluded with a landmark verdict. All three men were found guilty of manslaughter due to the difficulty of proving the exact medical cause of death from the skeletal remains, but the judge utilized his maximum sentencing powers. He handed down life sentences with a minimum non-parole period of 20 years, ensuring the killers would spend decades behind bars for their depravity. The building at No. 31 Granville Road became an infamous dark tourism spot, with locals claiming the narrow stairwells were permanently cursed by the restless spirit of the young hostess. The structure was eventually demolished in 2012, completely erasing the physical walls of the Chamber of Horrors, but the psychological scars left on the community of Hong Kong could never be torn down so easily.
Today, the Hello Kitty murder remains a dark, cautionary benchmark in the annals of global true crime. It stands as a chilling reminder of how easily absolute evil can manifest behind the closed doors of a crowded apartment building, while the rest of the world simply walks by. Fan Man Yi's tragic story is a stark testament to the terrifying intersection of gang violence, drug psychosis, and human apathy. The most unsettling aspect of the entire case, however, remains the haunting imagery of the plush toy itself. To this day, anyone who knows the dark history of Granville Road can never look at the innocent, smiling face of that cartoon character the same way again, knowing what it once hid inside its synthetic, hollow smile.